Welcome to the webcast series discussing CompressionInsight, one of the products from Pattern Discovery Technologies. This webcast is going to specifically focus on product installation. So we'll look at some of the topics that we're going to discuss here. Well, when you install any product, you have to worry about security and authentication. Talk about the installation files, where you get them and which files you expect to find. The file locations that we create on your file system. And we'll finish up with the processes that are left running on your machine after installation. So first things first, let's talk about security and authentication. Everybody should be familiar with the Pi SMT tool. This is my test server. And on that server, I'm going to have a number of options for setting up authentication for CompressionInsight. The first and most popular should be mapping an Active Directory domain user. In this case, this is myself. Mapping a domain user back to a Pi identity and therefore giving you access to those Pi points that you've set up through this Pi identity. Any process that's running as this user will then have applicable access to the Pi server and its tags. Another option is to set up a trust. I've got a number of trusts set up here. This one for CoreSite is actually mapped back to a specific IP address. So you could establish a trust for CompressionInsight that maps the IP address of the machine that you're actually going to run CompressionInsight on, and that'll open up access to it. Another method here is to specifically create a trust for the application names themselves. And so in this case, I have CompressionInsight.exe and PDTEngine.exe set up as trusted applications for my Pi server. I'm going to use a mapping here myself, okay? So now we've got to consider what files are you going to expect to find when you install CompressionInsight. And that's going to largely depend on whether you purchased the product or you're evaluating it. If you're just evaluating it, then you're going to find, through our website, you've downloaded an installation package here. So in this case, this is CompressionInsight version 1.2. If you've purchased the product and not yet installed it, then you may have a license file that's also come alongside your installation download. So I'm just going to go through the installation steps here. A simple welcome screen, must agree to a end user license agreement. This is in fact our beta release of 1.2, and so in this case it's a beta end user license agreement that I'm agreeing to. An installation location. My machine is a 64-bit operating system, and so we're going to install into the x86 program files directory. And now I'm being prompted for the engine service account. What needs to happen here is we need to specify a username and a password of a user account on your domain that the engine will run as. This is only important if you set up your security so that you're mapping a specific user over to a Pi. If you're using a trust, then this is not so. So we're going to go ahead and install CompressionInsight. What it's doing is placing the appropriate files in the right locations, registering a Windows service, which is our analytics engine. So we have some options here when the installer completes, and the first one is to start CompressionInsight. I won't do that because I'll start it manually, but I'll have a look at the quick start, the PDF quick start. The quick start is just a simple PDF file that's going to run through what CompressionInsight is, what it does, how it does it, some of the user interface details that you might see. This documentation is a valuable resource to browse through the first time you run CompressionInsight. So now that I have CompressionInsight running, I've gone through my installation files. Let's start up CompressionInsight and have a look at the user interface. So what I'm looking at now is I'm being prompted for my Pi server. So I'm going to use blue by default here. I'll bring CompressionInsight into view. And what CompressionInsight has done is recognize that we don't have any tags added to CompressionInsight yet, and so we want to add some tags. And so I'm going to add just a single tag here, just for educational purposes. I'll add the first tag. We get a little warning here that talks about the fact that CompressionInsight actually has to modify the exception deviation settings for the tags that you add to CompressionInsight. What needs to happen here is that we zero out the exception deviation, and that effectively moves a lot more data from the interface nodes to the Pi server so that we have a lot more data to analyze and come up with recommendations. The change that we're going to make now is reversible at any time through the product. But if you're nervous about this, then what we recommend is for you to use the Excel SMT plugin to go and get a record of the current exception and compression settings for your tags, just so you have a backup record of those. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now I have a tag added here. We're not going to be worried so much in this webcast about the actual analytics and the user interface. What I am going to be interested in, though, are the actual files, the file locations for where we store things. So if you look in your file system now, C/PDT, Compression Insight, we're going to see 3 different directories here. The first one is where our license file is going to be located. So if you've made a purchase, you've received a license file, and you should follow the instructions that you got when you were sent the license file. Effectively, it's stopping the engine, placing the license file in the right location, and restarting the engine. Back in here, though, we've got some user settings for the Compression Insight client itself, as well as some logging. And then back to the engine, we have some logging files, which we're all used to seeing. But we also have the snapshot files. And so those are organized according to the Pi server that we're connected to. And so in this case, I'm connected to the Pi server blue. So I go in and look in here, and I can actually see for the tag that I added, I can see here a bin file, which is actually going to store in a binary format. It's going to store the snapshot values that we're collecting now from the Pi server, and that will be used in our analytics. We have a few more files here that you're welcome to have a look at. They're user-readable CSV files, and they store things like the tag attribute history, which will be covered in a different webcast, as well as this audit file. The audit file, if we have a look at it here in a text pad, a text editor, we can see that what we're storing here are the original settings for the exception deviation and the compression deviation. This allows us to then restore those exception and compression values back to what they were when we originally added the tag to Compression Insight. So we've talked about the file locations. It's important to note here that the snapshot files and your snapshot data, this data is never moved from your machine. Okay, it's never sent back to a centralized server. It never leaves your machine. So all your proprietary data stays on your machine itself. The last thing we'll have a very quick look at here are the processes that are running on your machine. So we've got Compression Insight itself. So this is our client. Okay, this is our user interface process. We have an analysis repository, which is an in-memory process that stores all of our analytic results. And lastly, we have, as a Windows service running, we have our PDT engine. Okay, the PDT engine is actually, it does all of our data collection and analytics, and it runs as a Windows service in the background all the time, regardless if you're logged in or not. Okay, so that covers installation of the product. Make sure you have a look at the other webcast videos for further information. Thanks for watching.